Hello and welcome. My name is Roberta Watson, and on behalf of Jefferson's Office of Alumni Relations, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this evening's webinar. I like to move it, getting back to exercising safely. Tonight, we are joined by 4 of our faculty members from the Department of Exercise Science, and they'll be sharing some of their best tips for how to reintroduce different exercises back into your routine. I'll let them introduce themselves during their talks, but before we have them get started, I wanted to let you know we will be answering your questions at the end of the program. So please feel free to drop those in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the end. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Stephen Thomas, who's going to get us started.
So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Steve Thomas. I'm an associate professor and the chair of the Exercise Science Department at Thomas Jefferson on our East Falls campus. So we're a new department out there. And I'm going to just start off by kind of talking about, I think it's important to understand how your tissues adapt with exercise and how they adapt when you've stopped exercising, but then eventually want to start back. So I think it's an important thing to know. So when we look at our body, we have, as we know, a bunch of different tissues. We have bone, we have cartilage, muscle, tendon, ligament, and they all have the capacity to get loaded. And that's what we do on a daily basis. Gravity loads our tissues, but forces as we move also put loading through them. So the types of loads we often see are compression loads, so that squeezing kind of load, and we see that in bone and cartilage a lot. Tension, or that pulling apart load, we see often in tendon and ligament and muscle. And then torsional load, so twisting load, we could see that really in any of the tissues, depending on how we move our joints or how we're functioning or exercising. But with all of those loads, we know that tissue will adapt. So there's this law called Wolff's Law, and it describes really how bone adapts to mechanical loading. And the best way to really describe this is, we all know about braces in our teeth. And this is an everyday situation that you'll see how Wolff's Law basically works. So when we apply a force through the braces and we're trying to move the teeth in a certain direction, our cells, so our bone cells that kind of reabsorb or break down bone, are osteoclasts. They'll be breaking down bone on the side that's getting loaded. And then on the other side, our osteoblasts that will lay down new bone cells, will be laying those down. And that allows your teeth to literally move through your jawbone. Right. So when we apply these mechanical stresses, when we walk or we run, our bone is going to adapt to that stress so that it can handle it and it can get stronger. We have the same thing with our soft tissues as well. And this is a slightly different law called Davis's law, but it's essentially the same thing. But the one thing we need to think about with all of these is really we could overload things. We could underload our tissues. And then there's really this kind of optimal loading that we want to cause good adaptation so that we get stronger bones, stronger muscles, stronger ligaments and tendons. So how do we know how to do that? So there's a thing called minimal essential stress. And we know with every exercise we do, it has to be repetitive, right? We do a bicep curl, we're going to do 10 or 12 reps, take a break, do 10 or 12 more reps, right? So we have that repetitive loading, but we have this minimal essential stress is what will start that adaptation process. For a bone, it's about 1/10 of the force to fracture it. In soft tissue, it's about 4% strain, so increasing its length by 4% of its original. The problem is we have no idea what 1/10 of our force is to fracture our bone, right? So it's really always a guessing game, right? We're going to load, we're going to see if we're causing good adaptations. If we're not, we're going to try to load a little bit more. And as we do get adaptations, as our tissue gets stronger, this is really a moving target, right? So 1/10 of the force to fracture, if our bone gets stronger, that's going to increase. So we can't keep doing the same weight. We can't keep doing the same reps, the same amount of loading and expect to continue to adapt because we're always changing that minimal essential stress. So we have to add more weight, more loading. But we see, cross-sectional area, bones, tendons, things like that will get bigger as we load them. A couple things to consider. So as we're recovering, right, there's a lot of biological factors that play into how quickly we could recover and then load it again so that we could get a good adaptation. So when we think about our tendon, ligament, and cartilage, which are things that tend to get injured a lot, especially in a repetitive manner, they have a poor blood supply. They don't have good blood. Our muscles have very good blood supply. That's why they're so red. So these tissues, because of the lack of blood supply, take a little bit longer to recover and adapt. We may feel good and we may feel like, oh yeah, I could go back and work out again. But that's from our muscle. That's something that recovers quickly. Our tendons, ligaments, cartilage take a little bit longer. So we really have to slow things down, especially in the beginning, to try to help our tissues catch up a bit. Age is a big factor. Obviously, our ability to recover really increases throughout development. And then around skeletal maturity, we start to see a decline with age, unfortunately. And then other things, comorbidities, diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, those factors do have influence on how our tissues recover. And then the environment, if we're a smoker or we have not so great of a diet, so a very high fat diet, high sugar content, those types of things will affect our recovery process too. So trying to take all of this into consideration. We could go to that other extreme of overloading, right? And we could get injuries like stress fractures that you see here on the x-rays. And that's essentially where we're loading it and we're not allowing enough recovery and the tissue gets weaker instead of getting stronger. Same thing with tendons. So this is a big tendon that's very inflamed and irritated, and you can see that area that's very hypertrophied or really swollen. So that's like a type of tendonitis that could occur. So we see the same thing across bone and soft tissue from an overloading standpoint. If we go to the underloading, or what we all went through during COVID, likely, right? So we could really rely on the astronauts to understand how our tissues, are affected by underloading. They're in zero gravity environments, and we see it. NASA does a lot of this research. You lose rigidity in your bone. It's easier to bend. Bone formation is much slower. And then we actually increase at an increased rate, or we age at an increased rate in space. So there's things called telemeters, which are kind of like a marker of our biologic age. And as they shorten, as we get older, they shorten. And they shorten at a faster rate when we're out in space. So similar things happen just due to physical inactivity and not being active in exercise. So kind of wrapping it up and pulling it all together, recovery is key and it's governed by biology. So we can't push it too much, right? We could do all these types of recovery things that we see on the internet to try to speed it up, but really you could only push biology so far. So we really have to keep that in mind. Really listen to your body. So if you're sore, take a day off. Allow a little bit more recovery, especially in the early phase of starting up. If something is painful, something's going wrong, go see a physician and get it checked out. And really give your tendons time to catch up, right? The muscle's going to speed up ahead of time. Give your tendons a little more time, especially in the beginning, to catch up so you don't get in these tendonitis situations. And as you get older, we can't recover like we used to, right? So give a little bit more time, a couple of days off, allow our bodies, a little more forgiveness as we get a little bit older. So I'm going to hand it off to Erin now.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you again. I echo Dr. Thomas. Thank you for joining us. My name is Erin Pletcher, and I am also in our Department of Exercise Science, but I teach specifically in our graduate level athletic training program. And so this evening, I'm going to talk to you about resistance training, or what we call strength training. So to start off, where do we even begin, either back into resistance training or training from the beginning? We want to, if you've resistance trained before, to decrease the last weight you used about 40 to 50%. That's a good starting point. to how Dr. Thomas said, see how your body responds the next day, the next 2 days. Or if you're just beginning for the first time, we can start training with a weight that we can lift comfortably 12 to 15 consecutive times. Before we do our resistance training workout, we always want to start with a warm-up. So a 5-minute walk, a 10-minute bike ride. That's meant to increase our body temperature, which gets the blood flowing to the muscles we're about to use. When you're finished with your whole workout, if it's resistance training plus some cardio conditioning, when we're all done for that workout session, we want to do a cool down. And so that helps to bring our heart rate, our blood pressure back down to its original level. When we start getting into the weight room, or if you have some weights at your home, there are a lot of different machines in the gym that can be useful for isolated exercise and isolated muscles. However, it can be difficult to get a full body workout and really build strength. So if you feel comfortable, free weights or a barbell are a great way to mimic your everyday movement patterns. When we are beginning again, we want to lower the weights that we used to use. We want to use fewer repetitions until, again, we understand how our body is responding to this new lifting technique. And we want to slow down our motion to focus on the technique. We want to concentrate on the muscle that we are intending to target and really focus on, do we feel that muscle working? If you are able to get to a gym, you want to maybe find somebody who's familiar with the equipment and the proper movement techniques so that they can give you some feedback about, does this look right? What else could I use? If it's too hard to use a dumbbell, what machines are available? While we're doing each exercise, we also want to make sure that we are not holding our breath. You want to breathe out as you're lifting the weight and then breathe in as you're lowering the weight. Starting off or back into a resistance training program, it's helpful to combine isolation and compound exercises. Compound exercises shown on the picture on the right will use more muscles, allowing you to use heavier weights. However, you might become slightly fatigued from using more muscles and a heavier weight. So we could end our workout with isolation exercises, as we see Arnold doing his bicep curl there, where we're really just working on one muscle at a time. And so these isolation exercises are helpful if in your compound exercises, you notice a muscle weakness or a muscle imbalance between your right and left side. Some good examples of those compound exercises to start with are shown here. So if you've never resistance trained before, my favorites to start with are just a body weight squat or push-ups. You can do push-ups on the wall or in your kitchen chair and then move your way down to kneeling on the floor and a full push-up on the floor. Listed up here too is, again, a full body squat or a Romanian deadlift, where we're really working on hinging at the hip or bending forward at the hip. We can do a reverse lunge, a bent over row where we're pulling the weight up towards our chest. A plank, again, we can start on our knees and work our way to extending our legs all the way out. A glute bridge or a wood chop, as you can see in the picture listed on the slide. In between your workout sessions, you want to incorporate recovery time. And so active recovery means staying physically active while we recover from this higher intensity exercise. This increased or this continued activity is meant to be gentle and non-strenuous. And so we're talking about some type of cardio training that's at a low to moderate intensity for about 30 minutes to an hour of time. The cardio in between our weightlifting sessions can help get the blood flow back to our muscles to bring more nutrients there and potentially decrease that muscle soreness we might feel the first few times. We might also just want to incorporate passive recovery. As Dr. Thomas said, sometimes you might just be completely tired from a workout that you did the day before. And passive recovery would just be sitting on your couch watching Netflix or watching the Eagles on a Sunday afternoon. And so finally, consistency is key. To help keeping consistent in either getting back to your resistance training routine or starting a new resistance training routine is to plan out your workouts for that entire month. Not only will it keep you organized, it will be easier to make that exercise routine a habit, because all you have to do is bring your gym clothes, show up, and look at the exercises that you already have written out. Each pre-planned workout should lead to the same goal. So that month I want to work on strength overall, or that month I really want to work on my balance. This will help your body better able to adapt, as Dr. Thomas talked to us about, and see that progress and the improvements that we are trying to gain.
Thanks, Dr. Pletcher. I'm going to kind of bounce off of the same idea, but I'm going to focus more into getting back into running, specifically from our cardio workout. So my name is Dr. Kelly Pagnotta, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Exercise Science, and I'm the program director for our entry-level master's degree program. So I'm going to break this up into kind of 3 phases when I talk about getting back into running, and we can apply this really into any sort of cardiovascular programming. But I break it up into 3 phases, and that is before you run, during your run, and then after you run, because each of these really have an influence on how well we're going to do and how our performance is going to go. So before you run, my strongest recommendation is to get fitted for good running shoes. Even if you're going to walk a 5K and that's your main goal, you still want to be in well-supportive shoes that are designed for your feet. So there are a ton of different stores that you can go to that they have trained folks who will measure your feet and watch you walk, and they'll watch your gait, they'll watch you run, and they'll pick the shoes that are best suited for your feet. And so I'm going to recommend that you go and get fitted for a good pair of running shoes first. The next thing that I want you to really focus on before you get back into a running program, and this is going to be the same for even resistance training as well, but hydration and nutrition go hand in hand. You need to fuel your body, because we can't perform on an empty stomach. We can't perform with no fuel. You wouldn't take your car on a cross-country road trip without putting gas in the car, without checking the oil, maybe without getting the tires rotated. So we have to get all of those things kind of out of the way first in order to get started on the right foot. And I do kind of mean that, pun intended. Before we go for a run, the next thing we're going to do is really focus on our warm-up. And that's the same reason that we're going to focus on a good warm-up as the resistance training. We want to get that blood flow going to the muscles. We want to get that body temperature up. So from a running standpoint, a really good warm-up is just a good walk where we can gradually increase our speed over the course of a few minutes. We also want to do some dynamic stretches and dynamic exercises. So if you look at the picture on the left, we might do some hip swings. We might do some butt kicks. We might do some bounding, really big, broad movements that are going to get the muscles warmed up and ready to go. This is not a warm up like we used to do in elementary school PE class, where we all kind of just gather around in a circle and stand and touch our toes. That's a little bit more passive than what we want to do when we get ready to exercise and to go for a run or to get going into some cardio. We want to be a little bit more active in that to get that blood flow really going. So a really simple walk as you start to increase your speed into almost a power walk before you start your run is a great way to do that. So during your run, really what you want to do is plan it out. So just like Dr. Pletcher said, with your resistance training, you want to have a plan in mind. There's nothing worse than saying, I'm going to go out for a 20-minute run and getting 20 minutes away from your house and realizing you have to get 20 minutes back. right? So halfway through, you're going to turn around and come back. We were doing a 5-mile run, a 2-mile run, right? I'm going to do a 2-mile walk run. And so I'm going to go 1 mile, one direction, and then the next mile back. You want to know which way you're going, so that you kind of have that in mind. Are we going all uphill? Are we all going on a curve because I live on the side of a mountain and I'm really slanted? So you want to start to plan out where you're going to go. This is also really important from a safety feature. You want to let people know where you're going and what your traditional route's going to be, so that if, we don't like to think that way, but something happens and they need to come get you, maybe you roll your ankle, or you just get really tired or whatever it is and you want to come home, people should know where to find you. So it doesn't have to be as elaborate as those folks who plan out the crazy pictures, which I'm totally impressed about, who can map their runs that way. But just kind of have a plan in mind of what you want to do and how far you want to go and where you're going to go. The next thing you want to do when you're going back into any kind of running program, and again, this goes for cycling, it can go if you're using an erg machine, anything like that, is to start off slow. It's a balance. So if we're going for a distance, make sure that your speed is a lot lower. If we're going for speed, make sure that your distance is a lot lower. Figure out where it works for you and kind of your sweet spot. From a cardiovascular perspective, you should be able to carry on a full conversation and have a complete sentence with a person next to you while you're at this exercise intensity. And that's a pretty good pace for you, because if you are so winded that you can't carry a full conversation, you should probably back it down a little bit. A great way to get started into this cardiovascular exercise, I really like is interval training. So 20 seconds walk, 20 seconds run, 30 seconds walk, 30 seconds run, whatever that looks like for you. And my recommendation is try out one interval kind of session, one interval, whether it's 30 seconds, a minute, whatever you kind of want to do, what you think you can do from a jogging perspective comfortably and still hold that conversational pace. Try that out 1 or 2 times, 3 times, see if you like it, before deciding to switch it up, and make sure that you kind of get that routine going. After you get better, your body adapts. You can always increase the amount of time that you start to run and decrease the amount of time that you start to walk, in order to build up to be able to run consistently. Or you can maintain that same interval run and just increase your distances. There are a lot of people who will do 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, full marathons, doing a walk run interval. And that's totally acceptable, whatever works for you. But it does give your body a nice break. So you can kind of find what works for you. I find that especially for folks getting back into running, the intervals are a lot less daunting, because you know that you have a break to look forward to. There are some fantastic apps on your phone that you can download that will beep or ding or talk to you when you need to, start running, start jogging, start walking, whatever it is. So those are great. And again, it's all about a balance. So you'll be able to find that balance between speed and distance, and what's comfortable through your intervals. And that's the biggest indicator, the biggest recommendation I can have, especially as you're getting back in. And then after you run, again, we want to do a cool down. So maybe we go back into walking. So slowing down from a jog to a faster walk to a slow, steady walk that you decrease your heart rate, get it back down to normal. We want to focus on our hydration and our eating, our nutrition. We use that energy and now we need to be able to replace it. And the biggest indicator of recovery, and one of the best things that you can do for your body from a recovery standpoint and an injury prevention standpoint, is sleep. That is how your body heals. That is when your body will recover from things. So making sure that you're getting a good night's sleep and that you're planning your day around your sleep schedule. So if you decide that you need to get up at 4 a.m. to get your workouts in, you should probably be really planning on the back end what time you need to go to bed to get a full night's sleep, because your sleep health is the biggest indicator of recovery. And that's really what's going to drive, injury rates, drive your performance, and make you a functioning human. Nobody needs you to be cranky because you got up at 4 a.m. And didn't get enough sleep. in addition to, being sore and being hungry, all of those things your body needs to function. So.
Good evening, everybody. I will take the helm here from Dr. Pagnotta and introduce myself. My name is Ricker Adkins. I'm the assistant professor within the athletic training program as well on the East Falls campus, and I also serve as our clinical education coordinator. So my portion to wrap up the evening is, what do you do when things just plain go wrong? So my portion is going to be a little bit more about, when nothing seems to be coming to an answer for you, what are some solutions and things that you can look into yourself as far as educating your routine a little bit more, improving on it, and maybe looking for other resources, including athletic trainers. So I really like this slide as an introductory portion to my talk this evening, because just as Dr. Thomas mentioned earlier, can we really grasp the gravity of the situation? So gravity sometimes, when we think about it, is a physics class, things that we didn't really enjoy. And many times that force itself, especially if we're coming out of more of a sedentary lifestyle change, such as, a global pandemic, things may be a little bit more difficult for us to get back into the swing of things than we originally planned. So maybe we can look into smaller things, such as our activities of daily living, such as how we walk, ascend stairs, and even just looking at our total steps throughout a day and how we get those done. So we can definitely take into appreciation that sometimes we can't grasp the gravity ourselves, and sometimes slowing down and looking at things a little bit more methodically, such as gravity, to better understand how our joints move and what are some things that we can do to improve on it. So sometimes I know after a hard workout, this individual is exactly how we feel. We feel like we're walking with a couple peg legs. And what are some reasons behind that? It's not necessarily that maybe you took on too much too soon, but maybe a different swift change of how we look at our mechanics and how we look to approach getting back into activity is much like Dr. Pagnotta suggested, more of a walk, run, circuit type of thing. Start to incorporate more range of motion into your activities, such as lunges, or even just different total range of motion exercises that you may be accustomed to from previous activities that you enjoy. Sometimes it may be a little bit more of a problematic history. So if you think to yourself about maybe that old knee injury that you had, or that if you look back upon yourself and just think, man, my knees just are really rough, or I had that one poor ankle injury. And it doesn't have to be in the past year. It can be several years and even further into your history, and it could still be causing you complications. So some things to consider here is the entire picture, your entire history, and potentially the reason why that you're still having these issues, and maybe a troublesome past with getting back into activity because you have these ailments or issues and you end up feeling like you have these peg legs. Maybe it's time for you to take a little bit further step into how this can be accomplished. And obviously, I think looking at any rehabilitation science individual, you can certainly benefit from picking their brain, or even seeing them professionally and personally to expand on that understanding. So sometimes it's the situation, and misery loves company. And I think that this Rocky movie certainly adds a different feeling towards this slide, and especially with understanding what exactly I'm trying to get at. So when you start to look at kinetic chain and motion analysis, or just understanding the underlying major points of biomechanical analysis, we need to understand that lower extremity push off is vital. So when we look at big toe and single stance, it's responsible for 50% of our body weight. And if you look at the bottom of your shoes and it's not even worn towards your big toe, especially if your shoes are a little bit older, it's probably a reason why you're still having a problem. And then from there, looking a little bit further up to your tibiofemoral joint or your knee, it may be a little bit more rotational. So sometimes our students like the analogy of when you're running, it's much like a throwing motion. There is a lot of rotation that is encountered here. And most times when we think about our knee, because of the bad history we hear about knees, or maybe your own, you think, I have to keep my knees straight back and forth. But what actually needs to occur there is a little bit of rotation called the screw home mechanism. So sometimes that typically can confound with other issues such as your reciprocal inhibition, where one muscle just takes over from another, and maybe just old myofascial issues. So I always look at this as like a rocky road. If you start to have a massage, or you start to foam roll yourself and you really find really painful points, it's not that you want to continue to keep rolling over those and add insult to injury. It may be the fact that you need a little bit more deep tissue work and myofascial releases, which are very easily accomplished by someone within our field. So this can even go a little bit deeper. And when we look at the big toe, as I mentioned before, and look at the feet, we want to think, just as we heard from Dr. Pletcher, that we need to increase our load by 40, 50%. And this is particularly important for your feet, because if you think about the load that we withstand while running, it's at least 4 times our body weight in newtons. So with that pound per pressure concept, that's a lot of load for our feet to withstand. And sometimes even the best shoe is not still going to really help us understand that load, because it's not always going to be the best solution. Maybe your feet are just too weak and we need to strengthen them. So sometimes there is the solution of, well, maybe I run too much on my toes or too much on my heel. In the research that we've seen, it really can't change how much you run on your toes or your heel. It's really more so a better understanding of what's your cadence. Are your stride lengths equal? These are things that we really want to look towards. And you could even take it a step further to do some toe curls with a towel or even marble pickups, and really just work on strengthening those intrinsic muscles of your toes and within your feet. With that focus of bilateral stride length and cadence, you get a little bit more improvement from those muscles, if they're working as they should within the foot, to get a better push off. So really important takeaway here is strengthen your feet, make sure that you're getting equal stride lengths and push off, and you're really going to see the benefit traveling up the body from the previous slide. So you have to ask yourself, are you one of these minions, either Superman, the Hulk, whatever your favorite superhero is? What is your center of gravity? So I like to really think about this as a group activity when I educate my patients and students on this concept of, where do you get your major force generation? Are you somebody that likes to push right to left? Or are you somebody that goes left to right? Either way, if you are that individual, think about how you go throughout your daily life. When you stand up, do you depend on your right leg more or your left leg more? When you go upstairs, you depend on going up your left leg more or your right leg more? Whatever the answer may be, try to do the opposite. Your activities of daily living, such as your steps throughout the day, are far more and higher in number of steps than what you would ever do cardiovascularly. So if you're really trying to increase strength and increase the load tolerance of a particular joint, try to do it slower. Try to do it throughout your entire day. You'll certainly see the benefits. Finally, you got to challenge your mind. So if you start to look at things and go onto YouTube, there are a lot of beneficial self-mobilizations. When you're thinking about the intrinsics of the foot, you really can't go wrong of just trying to move it a little bit better. And then with that, your activities of daily living, really concentrate on those, as I just mentioned on the previous slide. Some other things you can try are PNF stretching, such as really push and relax stretches, which will help to increase your mobility a little bit quicker, and then follow that up with a more longer standing static stretch. You also want to minimize your gravity input. So if you find that you land a lot harder when you're listening to yourself run, you're someone who likes to listen to music when you run, try to run without music. Really pay attention to how hard you impact between each side of your run. If you notice that one side is much harder and much firmer, much more rigid as you run, you want to incorporate a more softer landing technique. And one example I use is a hula hoop. Can you put your legs in an offset position, right foot forward, left foot back, and the opposite, and then see if you can generate enough force to keep that hula hoop up, not with your legs side by side. Or if you want to throw the hula hoop, whatever traditional way you feel is best for you, and then challenge yourself and throw it to the other side, you will really start to work on intrinsic muscles throughout the kinetic chain in your lower extremity and start to really try to challenge yourself on your force generation. You'll be surprised how challenging this can be and be really beneficial for gait re-education, as well as just a fun exercise to get you moving back in a healthier manner.
Thank you so much for such an informative presentation. That was really interesting, and there was a ton of great tips to come from that. So now I'd like to invite our attendees to submit their questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll get to as many of those as we can during our presentation. So for the rest of the talk, we had a few questions come through the registration, and we'll get started with those. Maybe we can start with some different types of exercises. So anything that we didn't talk about, maybe water aerobics, but do you have any suggestions for those who like that particular type of exercise in the pool, and kind of how can they incorporate different things to get them started?
So we just talked about this in our class the other day. But yeah, there are a lot of great exercises to do if aquatherapy, aqua workouts, water aerobics is kind of more your cup of tea. You can just use the variance of the height of the water and just walk through it. So the deeper that you are into the water, the more of your body weight pressure the water is going to take away. There usually, if you have access to a gym with a pool or an intentional aquatic therapy place, they'll have pieces of equipment that will either help keep you afloat, so you can do more aggressive lower extremity leg exercises like running but in deep water. There are flotation devices that you can hold onto, and so the buoyancy of water pushes everything up. And so it's the opposite of doing resistance training on land, that you're now trying to push against that buoyant force that's pushing you up. So if you get a dumbbell that floats, it's going to be harder to push it down into the water, but easier to have the water help you bring it up. So you can mimic a lot of on land strengthening exercises with either using buoyant pieces of equipment. Usually a pool will also have weighted pieces of equipment the same way you would use it on land. Some of that weight is taken away, again, because of that buoyant force of the water. So yeah, there are plenty of exercises you can take from land to in the water if you just feel more comfortable in an aquatic setting.
Yeah, and I would also add too, if you're dealing with arthritis, whether it's back arthritis, knee or hip arthritis, and you have trouble loading in exercises in on land situation, the pool is great, right? Because as Dr. Pletcher said, you unload your body, so you could get some of those, resistance from the drag of the water. So as you move through the water, there's drag forces that create resistance, and you'll challenge your muscles, but you'll do it in a very unloaded joint environment, so that you're not going and suffering in pain trying to get a workout in. So yeah, if you're suffering from any form of arthritis, it's a great idea to get in the pool.
Thank you. So moving on to a different type of exercise. So I know Kelly mentioned a little bit about working with an erg or a rowing machine, but besides potentially maybe doing some intervals or that type of training with that exercise equipment, any other recommendations for how to incorporate different workouts using that machine specifically?
I think the biggest thing with the erg machine is that it is an upper body in theory, but it's also your lower body, right? So it's making sure that you're doing the correct motion with it and you're using the proper form. I find that for a lot of people, the biggest problem with the erg machine is that their form is incorrect, and therefore they start to get that low back pain. And so I think that the first thing that you want to do on an erg machine is to figure out the correct form, making sure that you're loading through the legs, and as you pull with the arms, that the lower extremity loads with it, and your spine and your core are engaged. So you have to really kind of get yourself to this, what I like to call a neutral pelvis. So when you sit down, you're sitting on those bony butt bones, right? So if you start to sit, you can feel that kind of bony marker underneath your in your tush, right? And if you roll and you tilt your pelvis one direction, you kind of offload it. And if you tilt yourself the opposite direction and you bring your hip bones forward, you offload it the opposite way. You really want to get yourself to that neutral position. Pull your belly button to your spine. And that's how you know that you're engaged every time that you use it, because as soon as you kind of relax and sit back, you're going to get into that really poor form. And that's the biggest problem with the erg machine is people are like, oh, this is so, like, it feels better. And then the next day they're like, oh my gosh, my low back hurts like crazy. So getting into that right form first, and then working into whatever it is that you want to do. And again, it's very similar to a running, a bike, anything like that. You can go for distance or you can go for speed, trying to find that balance with it, but making sure that you have the right form first. And that could mean that you just go on it a couple of different times, really light, really slow, just to get the form. And as soon as your form breaks down, stop. That's a sign that you're done for the day, and then go do something else. And then the next day or 2 days later, go back and try it again.
Great advice there. That's very helpful. And maybe you're having somebody come show them how to do it if they're in a gym, and having the experts show them. Moving on to something that you can either do at home or in a gym. What are your views of exercises like down on a mat, doing something like burpees or other stretching? How should people get started doing things that they can do at home?
I was going to say, I personally think that some of your best exercises can be done with no equipment. So body weight squats, push-ups, planks, single movement exercises. They're complex, but I would start with those first before I went straight into a burpee, right? Because if I can't do a squat or a push-up, then I'm not going to do a burpee correctly. So I want to get those basic fundamental movements down first before I even start to add weight or multiple series of exercises with it. So I would say push-ups, squats, lunges, planks, all of those kinds of things are fantastic to start off on the ground. You don't need any equipment besides, if you want to use a yoga mat, you don't even have to. You can use your carpet if you're comfortable with that, and a towel underneath your elbows. Whatever you want to do, you can get a really good workout in that way before adding anything else. I'll let anyone else jump in if they want.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I have younger kids, so it's always, that balance of like, oh, I want to be at home and be with my kids, but it's a great thing to incorporate them into that stuff. So all these things you could do at home, right? If you're doing body weight squats or lunges around the house, the kids love that. They'll hop in, they'll start doing it with you. You could throw them on your shoulders if you want a little resistance, right? A little weight. So I try to do that now and then, and my kids really get into it. And then they get that habit of, hey, exercise and working out is a good thing. And you get that kind of instilled in them. I think it's a really good way to try to merge those two of staying healthy, but also spending time with your family.
Start them young. That's good. That's great. So another type of exercise that you can do, not being in a gym, if you're on your lunch break or something like that, going for a walk. How long do you need to go for a walk for it to make an impact?
The literature says 10 minutes. So if we get 3 10-minute walks in, say, take your morning coffee, your first call outside if you're able to, take a walk at lunch, decompress if you're working during the day at the end of your day with another walk around the block. And so instead of one long 30-minute walk, we get the same positive health benefits from just those short little walks, or park, a couple of blocks away from your office or at the far end of the parking lot, and make that your little bit of aerobic activity.
Great. So the next series of questions, I want to move into some specific demographics. So the first one I would like to bring up, we had a question submitted by an alumna. She was asking for some tips for returning to exercise potentially after having a surgery. She specifically had a cesarean and successive pregnancies. So kind of what do you suggest for those post-surgical alumni?
Dr. Adkins, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So, fun fact, my wife and I just had our first little baby boy on July 14th. And getting back into the swing of things, my wife is actually a pediatric physical therapist. So for those that have gone through a cesarean recently, or even think about a year after, you're still recovering from that surgery, and your core is still very much in need of some type of activation. So first and foremost, if we're thinking a little bit more about the more troubled side, that you're really still having some difficulty, whether it may be bowel or bladder issues, I always suggest going and seeing a pelvic floor specialist. Sometimes they're really the undersold heroes in that category, and really getting their insight as far as further examination and even rehabilitation techniques from them always can be very beneficial. Moving from that, working on Kegel exercises, incorporating some type of ball exercises, really working on more just diaphragmatic breathing. Those all in conjunction with one another really activate and to inhibit your parasympathetic nervous system, which ultimately sometimes can increase your heart rate exponentially, causing you to feel anxious, very irritated very quickly. And it's not always something beneficial or something you maybe even felt rewarding after exercise. So making sure that you're not breath holding, really working on forcefully taking a big deep breath in. Sometimes I suggest holding it for 3 to 5 seconds and then forcefully exhaling through your mouth. That's actually what our overall respiratory system was designed for. And then from there, starting from your back, working to rolling on your side and then getting over onto your stomach, working on just getting to a quadruped position. So whether it's extending one arm at one time or one leg at a time, or doing what we call a dead bug, being on your back, arms above your head, legs bent 90 degrees, and really extending and going out and really working on that diaphragmatic breathing at the same time. You'll probably feel a pretty deep burn in those positions and really working on that. But the important thing to understand is your core really hasn't been able to function as it should since that cesarean happened, and really getting that to work as it should with those smaller exercises, and then gradually working from a quadruped position and then trying to do those exercises from a seated position, eventually getting you to the point where you can get back to a little bit better activation when doing your activities of daily living.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And congratulations on your new addition to the family.
Thank you.
Another kind of demographic that we have joining us that wants some tips, we have baby boomers joining us. So I know we heard a lot about, as we get older, we're not recovering as quickly as we did when we were younger. But tips maybe for types of exercises for baby boomers or modifications or things like that for them.
I don't necessarily, my colleagues can voice their opinion. I don't necessarily think that we need to modify anything. Just because you are of a certain age doesn't mean you can't keep up with a younger, healthy person if you've been doing activity your whole life. If you're new into it, just being mindful of your inexperience in terms of technique and your body's not being used to either doing a cardiovascular activity or a resistance training activity, you might not feel so great the next day, and then you can adjust from there. So Dr. Thomas talked to us about how it will take longer for our body to recover so that we're getting stronger. We want to work on our strength training to increase our muscle mass. We want to work on our balance training. Strength training will also help to increase our bone density, all things that start to decrease as we get older. So I would say, you're starting the same way as somebody potentially new to a workout would start, and then just keep increasing and changing your workout as you get stronger and healthier.
I think the other thing to consider, oh, sorry, Dr. Thomas, I was just going to add, I think, and it goes back to the question, post-surgical too, is before you start any new exercise, get clearance from your physician. They're going to give you any sort of modifications that you need to do based on your specific either risk factors or comorbidities that you have. But also, if you're coming back from an injury or from a surgery, they're going to give you some specific things that they would like you to work on. Maybe it's specific range of motions or specific things to avoid for a while because the tissue is still healing. And as people age, again, like Dr. Pletcher said, I wouldn't say that we need to have specific restrictions just because you're of a certain age. I like to make those restrictions, those modifications, those differences on an individual level based on your risk factors that you have. So whether that's high blood pressure or diabetes or arthritis, maybe some modifications that we'll make are pool workouts for your arthritis, or maybe we'll start with lower intensity exercise to keep your heart rate down so that you're not as high risk. But again, it's individual based because there are some folks who are, significantly older than I am and in significantly better shape and much more fit. And so they don't need the same modifications that maybe I would just coming back to exercise. So.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Dr. Pagnotta, is get cleared by your physician. So, I know my dad's in the baby boomer era and my mom is too. And they have a lot of cardiovascular things that, my dad had bypass, my mom had valve replacement. So, it's really important that, the most common symptom for any cardiovascular event is shortness of breath. So, we're working out, that's what's going to happen, right? So we want to make sure that it's a true, hey, we're pushing ourselves and working out, and it's not a symptom of a cardiovascular issue. So definitely, getting that cleared, getting you should be having at that age a yearly stress test to really check for blockages. Getting echoes if you have a history of valve defects, things like that are really important, I think. But the other thing to consider as we get older, we lose mobility too. So I think a big focus of the exercise routine is really focusing on mobility, that dynamic warm up, like Dr. Adkins said, those soft tissue myofascial release kind of techniques and mobilizations are really important because as we start to work out, we get tighter, especially early on. So but in that age range, our joints are pretty stiff and tight as it is. So, we're really going to kind of add insult to injury, and we're going to be very stiff and tight. And it may, prevent us from wanting to go back to the gym again because, the heck with it. Like I was just in so much pain. And you start associating pain and soreness with working out instead of working out with a positive emotion response, right? So always making sure, don't push it too hard because you're going to get that negative feedback and you're going to say, every time I work out, I hurt. So I don't get that, emotional response that everybody says, I feel so great after a workout, right? Like that's what you want to associate with the workouts, not pain. So, working on mobility a little bit before you start resistance training could be a really good thing in that age group.
Thank you. And that kind of leads us into the last question I want to get to for this evening. So, after we're ill, or if we're, haven't worked out for a while and we're feeling a lot of fatigue once we finally do, or just being out of breath, what do you advise to keep you motivated to continue going back and doing exercises? What's your tip to keep us motivated?
I personally is find your why. So what's your reason for going and wanting to get back? Maybe you have an end goal. So some things might be that you just really want to participate in a certain event and you have that kind of set in your brain. I personally am a huge Disney fan. So you can motivate me to work out by having me do Disney races. I hate running, but if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it at Disney because I get a Mickey pretzel at the end. And, I get to be in the happiest place on earth. So maybe your motivation is that you're going to do a 5K with your kids, or that you want to challenge, your friend to who can bench press the most, whether, you want to get back into the resistance training. So, find your why, and that why shouldn't necessarily be, externally, like I want my clothes to fit better. It could be just make you feel healthier. So on those rough days of kind of being goal oriented and figuring out what's the purpose. I think, like Dr. Pletcher said, having that plan kind of mapped out and it built into my day, usually on my calendar too, is the best way to keep me motivated, because the first thing that's going to drop is the exercise if I don't feel like doing it. But if it's scheduled into my day, and I know exactly what I have to do, it's not as daunting of a task.
I would just add one quick thing too is give yourself 4 to 6 weeks. In that 4 to 6 weeks, you see the weight you started with is getting a lot easier. You start to see your clothes fit a little differently. You start to see some results. And then that's a motivating factor for wanting to keep going, right? Like, whoa, 4 to 6 weeks, I feel way better. I'm starting to look better in the mirror. I'm noticing something. And then that drives you to, okay, let me go another 4 to 6 weeks. Let me add cardio in addition to resistance training. Let me start focusing on my diet a little better. So, give yourself a little bit of time. Don't expect results right out of the gate, and just wait that 4 to 6 weeks, and you'll have some outcomes that I think will help motivate you to keep going.
That's excellent advice and a great way to end us for the evening. So thank you to each of you for joining us and sharing your tips on how we can get back into exercising safely. I do want to pull up some announcements for our alumni, just to share some upcoming events with you all. Just so you know, we have a few additional events coming up this fall. We have our Workout Wednesday series starting next Wednesday again. If you'd like to jump back in with us within your home, at the office, we have a great lineup coming up. We also have a mindfulness skills for leaders lunch and learn session on October 19th, and that'll be from 12 to 1 on Zoom. And then we have our in-person conspiracy theories talk at the Museum of the American Revolution coming up on November 9th. So we hope you can join us for many of our different events. You can see a full calendar at our website, jefferson.edu/alumni events. And my last little plug for the evening, if you haven't done so yet, please join us on our Jefferson Alumni Network, where you can see our list of different alumni and connect, and you can see the directory, connect with alumni, and update your profile. So you can sign up by going to the website or use the QR code on the screen. That's all for tonight. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you stay safe and stay well. Bye-bye.